The hum of the dryers was a lullaby I didn't know I needed, but it couldn't drown out the ache in my chest. I stood in the laundromat, staring at a pile of clothes that smelled like regret, wondering how I'd ended up here, alone, broke, and folding my life's mess in a run-down corner of Portland, Maine. Then he walked in, and everything changed. His name was Ethan, though I wouldn't learn that until later. He was tall, with a mop of chestnut hair that fell just shy of his eyes, and a faded denim jacket that looked like it had seen better days. The laundromat was empty except for us, the fluorescent lights flickering like they were as tired as I was. I was 24, fresh off a breakup that had gutted me, and moving to a new city with nothing but a duffel bag and a job at a coffee shop that barely paid the rent. My ex, Mark, had called me unfixable, and maybe he was right. I felt like a shirt caught in the spin cycle, tangled, worn, and nowhere near clean. Ethan didn't seem to notice my mess at first. He tossed his laundry into a machine, humming a tune I couldn't place, and glanced over with a half-smile that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Rough day?" he asked, his voice low and warm, like he already knew the answer. "Rough life?" I muttered, shoving a pair of jeans into my basket. I didn't mean to sound so bitter, but the words slipped out before I could stop them. He laughed, not mocking, just kind. "Yeah, I get that. Want a hand with those?" He gestured to my pile of clothes, which was threatening to avalanche onto the floor. I hesitated. I wasn't used to strangers being nice. Not in a city where everyone seemed to rush past each other, eyes glued to their phones. But something about his easy grin made me nod. "Sure, knock yourself out." We stood side by side, folding t-shirts and socks in a rhythm that felt oddly comforting. His hands moved with a quiet confidence, like he'd done this 1,000 times. "I'm Ethan," he said, glancing at me. "You new around here?" "Jake," I replied. "Moved here a month ago. Still figuring out how to survive." "Portland's not so bad," he said, stacking a pair of my boxers with a precision that made me blush. "It's got its secrets, though. You just got to know where to look." I didn't know what he meant, but his words stuck with me. There was something about Ethan, something unguarded yet mysterious, like he was holding a story he wasn't ready to tell. We talked as we folded about nothing and everything. The best dive bars, the worst winters, the way the ocean smelled at dawn. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. When the last sock was paired, he leaned against the table, his hazel eyes catching mine. "You're not unfixable, you know," he said, out of nowhere. I froze, wondering if I'd said something about Mark out loud. But I hadn't. He just knew. "How do you—" I started, but he cut me off with a shrug. "Just a guess. You got that look. Like you're carrying something heavy." I wanted to laugh it off, but my throat tightened. Instead, I mumbled, "Maybe I am." He didn't push. He just handed me my neatly folded stack and said, "Come back next week. I'm here every Thursday. Maybe I'll tell you one of my secrets if you tell me one of yours." I left the laundromat with clean clothes and something else, a spark I hadn't felt in months. But as I walked home through the chilly streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan's secrets were more than just small-town gossip. There was something deeper, something that made my heart race with both hope and fear. The next Thursday, I was back, my laundry basket heavier than necessary because I'd thrown in every scrap of fabric I owned just to have an excuse. Ethan was already there, leaning against a dryer, reading a dog-eared paperback. He looked up and grinned, like he'd been waiting for me. "You're back," he said, setting the book down. "Thought you might have skipped town." "Not yet," I said, trying to match his ease. "You promised me a secret, remember?" He chuckled, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Nervousness, maybe? Fair enough. "But you first." We fell into the same rhythm, folding clothes and trading stories. I told him about Mark, about how I'd thought we were building a life together until he left me for someone less complicated. Ethan listened, really listened, his eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, then said, "He didn't deserve you, Jake. You're not complicated. You're real." My face burned, and I busied myself with a pair of socks to hide it. "Your turn," I said, my voice rougher than I meant. Ethan hesitated, then leaned closer, his voice dropping. I used to live in Boston. Had a whole life there, good job, nice apartment, a boyfriend who seemed perfect. Then I found out he was lying to me. About everything. I waited, sensing there was more. But he pulled back, his smile returning like a mask. That's enough for now. Gotta keep you coming back, right? Over the next few weeks, the laundromat became our sanctuary. Every Thursday, we'd meet, fold clothes, and peel back layers of ourselves. I told him about my dreams of being a writer, how I'd given up on it after Mark said my stories were too much. Ethan told me about his love for painting, how he'd once sold a piece at a gallery, but hadn't picked up a brush in years. There was always a line he wouldn't cross, though, a secret he kept tucked away, even as we grew closer. One night, as the rain pounded against the laundromat's windows, he reached for my hand while we folded a bedsheet. His fingers lingered, warm and steady, and my heart stopped. "Jake," he said softly, "there's something I need to tell you. But it's big, and I'm scared it'll change how you see me." I swallowed, my pulse racing. "Whatever it is, I can handle it." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine, and for a moment, I thought he'd kiss me. But then the door swung open, and a stranger walked in, a man with sharp eyes and a coat too expensive for this place. Ethan's face went pale, and he dropped my hand like it burned. "Ethan," the man said, his voice cold, "we need to talk." And just like that, the spell was broken. I didn't know who this guy was, but I knew one thing. Ethan's secret was about to unfold, whether he was ready or not. The air in the laundromat turned heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. Ethan's eyes darted between me and the stranger, his easy confidence replaced by something I'd never seen in him: fear. I stood frozen, clutching a half-folded towel, as the man in the expensive coat stepped closer. "Ethan, you can't keep running," the man said, his voice clipped and authoritative. He was older, maybe mid-30s, with slick-back hair and a jawline that looked carved from stone. Everything about him screamed money and control, a stark contrast to the worn linoleum and humming dryers around us. "I'm not running," Ethan said, but his voice wavered. "I told you I'm done." The man's eyes narrowed. "Done? You don't get to decide that, Ethan. Not after everything." I wanted to say something, to step between them, but my feet felt glued to the floor. This wasn't my fight, but the way Ethan's shoulders tensed made it feel like it was. "Who's this?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. The man glanced at me, his gaze dismissive, like I was a stain on his pristine world. "Nobody you need to worry about," he said, then turned back to Ethan. "We had a deal." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Jake, can you give us a minute?" I didn't want to leave him. Not with this guy, not when he looked like a cornered animal. But his eyes pleaded with me, and I nodded, stepping outside into the rain. The cold stung my skin, but it was nothing compared to the unease churning in my gut. Who was that man? And what deal was he talking about? I leaned against the brick wall, the neon laundromat sign buzzing above me, and tried to piece it together. Ethan had told me bits of his past. Boston, the boyfriend, the lies, but there were gaps, shadows he wouldn't let me see. I thought about the way he'd held my hand just minutes ago, the warmth of his touch, and how it felt like we were on the edge of something real. Now, I wasn't so sure. 10 minutes later, the door creaked open, and Ethan stepped out, his jacket damp from the rain. The man was gone. "You okay?" I asked, searching his face. He nodded, but it was unconvincing. "Yeah, just old business. Old business that shows up looking like a mobster." I pressed, trying to keep my tone light, but failing. He forced a laugh. "Not a mobster, just someone I used to know." "Ethan, come on," I said, stepping closer. "You said you had a secret. Is this it?" "That guy." He looked away, his hands stuffed in his pockets. "It's complicated, Jake. I want to tell you, but I need time." I wanted to push, to demand answers, but the vulnerability in his eyes stopped me. Instead, I said, "Okay, but I'm here when you're ready." He smiled, a small, grateful thing, and we went back inside to finish folding. But the mood had shifted. The laundromat, once our safe haven, felt like a stage where something bigger was unfolding. Over the next few weeks, Ethan was different, distracted, quieter. He still showed up every Thursday, still helped me fold, but there was a wall between us now. I tried to break through, telling him about my latest story ideas, about how I'd started writing again because of him. He'd smile, nod, but his mind was somewhere else. One night, as we sat on the laundromat's bench, sharing a bag of chips, I couldn't take it anymore. "Ethan, what's going on? You're shutting me out." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm not trying to. It's just I did something in Boston. Something I'm not proud of." My heart sank, but I kept my voice steady. "What kind of something?" He looked at me, his eyes raw. "I was involved with someone powerful. He got me into things I didn't understand at first. Money, favors, lies. I thought I could handle it, but it spiraled. Why try to get out? He wouldn't let me." "The guy from the other night?" I asked, my stomach twisting. Ethan nodded. "His name's Victor. He's not a good person. I left Boston to get away from him, but he found me." I reached for his hand, and this time, he didn't pull away. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want you to look at me the way you're looking at me now," he said, his voice breaking. "Like I'm someone who could hurt you." "You wouldn't hurt me," I said, and I meant it. But even as I said it, doubt crept in. What exactly had Ethan done? And how dangerous was this Victor? Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his face went white. "I have to go," he said, standing abruptly. "Ethan, wait." But he was already out the door, leaving me with a pile of unfolded clothes and a heart full of questions. The laundromat felt emptier without Ethan, like the air had been sucked out of it. I didn't see him the next Thursday or the one after that. My texts went unanswered, and every time I passed the laundromat, I half expected to see him there, leaning against a dryer with that easy smile. But he was gone, and the silence was deafening. I tried to focus on my life, my job at the coffee shop, the stories I was writing, but Ethan's absence was a hole I couldn't ignore. I kept replaying our last conversation, his confession about Victor, the fear in his eyes. What had he gotten himself into? And why hadn't he trusted me enough to let me help? One night, unable to sleep, I went back to the laundromat. It was late, nearly closing time, and the place was deserted except for the night manager, a gruff guy named Carl who barely looked up from his magazine. I didn't have any laundry, but I sat on the bench where Ethan and I used to talk, hoping for what? A sign? A clue? That's when I saw it. A small notebook tucked under the bench, its cover worn and familiar. It was Ethan's, the one he'd been reading from that first night. My heart raced as I picked it up, flipping through the pages. It wasn't a novel like I'd thought. It was a journal, filled with Ethan's handwriting, sketches, and fragments of thoughts. One entry caught my eye, dated a month before we met. I thought I could outrun it, but Victor's reach is longer than I imagined. If he finds me, it's over. I just want to be free. My hand shook as I read on. There were mentions of deals and debts, cryptic references to things Ethan had done, things he regretted. One page had a sketch of a man who looked like Victor, his eyes cold and unyielding. Underneath, Ethan had written, "He owns me, and I don't know how to break free." I closed the notebook, my mind racing. Ethan wasn't just hiding from a bad breakup. He was running from something dangerous. I had to find him, but I had no idea where to start. Portland wasn't a big city, but it was big enough to swallow someone who didn't want to be found. The next day, I took the notebook to work, reading it between customers. One entry mentioned a bar on the waterfront, a place called the Rusty Anchor. Ethan had written, "It's where he used to meet his contacts. If he's here, that's where he'll be." I didn't know if he was Victor, but it was the only lead I had. That night, I went to the Rusty Anchor, a dive bar that smelled of beer and regret. The crowd was a mix of locals and rough-looking types, and I fell out of place in my worn sneakers and hoodie. I scanned the room, hoping to see Ethan, but he wasn't there. Instead, I saw Victor. He was at a corner table, talking to a man with a scar across his cheek. My heart pounded as I watched them, trying to stay unnoticed. Victor's voice was low, but I caught fragments. He can't hide forever, owes me consequences. I slipped out before they saw me, my mind spinning. Ethan was in trouble. Real trouble. I didn't know the details, but I knew I couldn't let him face it alone. Back in my apartment, I pored over the notebook again, looking for anything that might tell me where he was. One entry, dated just a week ago, mentioned a cabin in the woods outside Portland. It's my last safe place. If I can get there, maybe I can start over. I didn't know if Ethan was at the cabin, but I had to try. The next morning, I borrowed my coworker's car and drove out of the city, following the vague directions in the notebook. The road wound through dense forest, the air thick with pine and possibility. When I found the cabin, it was small and weathered, with a single light glowing in the window. I knocked, my heart in my throat. The door creaked open, and there he was, Ethan, looking tired but alive. "Jake," he said, his voice a mix of shock and relief. "How did you?" I held up the notebook. "You left this." I was worried. He pulled me inside, closing the door quickly. "You shouldn't be here. It's not safe." "I don't care," I said, my voice fierce. "You're in trouble, and I'm not letting you do this alone." For a moment, he just stared at me, his eyes soft and searching. Then he hugged me, tight and desperate, like I was the only thing keeping him grounded. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "Yes, you do," I said, and in that moment, I knew I'd do whatever it took to keep him safe. The cabin smelled of cedar and coffee, a stark contrast to the sterile hum of the laundromat. Ethan sat across from me at a rickety table, his hands wrapped around a chipped mug. The notebook lay between us, its pages a map of his past and the weight he carried. Outside, the forest was quiet, but the silence felt like it was holding its breath. "Tell me everything," I said, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. "No more secrets." Ethan sighed, his eyes fixed on the mug. "I was stupid, Jake. In Boston, I got caught up with Victor. He was charming at first. Rich, powerful, said he saw something special in me. I was a starving artist, barely making rent, and he offered me a way out. What kind of way? I asked, dreading the answer. He ran an operation. Nothing illegal at first, or so I thought. He'd connect people. Art collectors, investors, people with too much money and not enough morals. I was his liaison, I guess. I'd charm clients, make deals, move money around. It felt like a game until I realized what I was really doing. My stomach churned. What were you doing? Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. Helping him clean money. I didn't know the full scope at first, but by the time I figured it out, I was in too deep. Victor made it clear, leave, and I'd pay a price. So I stayed until I couldn't anymore. I reached for his hand, and he let me hold it. What changed? You, he said, his eyes meeting mine. Meeting you, talking to you. It reminded me who I wanted to be. Not some pawn in Victor's game, but someone who could be honest, who could love without lies. I left Boston the week after we met, but Victor's been tracking me ever since. My heart ached at his words, but fear crept in too. What does he want now? He thinks I have something of his, documents, proof of what he's done. I don't, but he doesn't believe me. He's dangerous, Jake. If he finds me here, he won't, I said, more confident than I felt. We'll figure this out together. Ethan's smile was sad but grateful. You don't know what you're signing up for. I know I'm not leaving you, I said, and the words felt like a vow. Over the next few days, we holed up in the cabin, planning our next move. Ethan showed me the rest of the notebook, sketches of places in Portland, names of people he'd worked with, fragments of a life he was trying to leave behind. We debated going to the police, but Ethan was scared they'd dig into his past and pin him for things he didn't do. Victor's got connections, he said. Cops, lawyers, he's untouchable. Then we make him touchable, I said, an idea forming. What if we find those documents he thinks you have? Use them to expose him. Ethan shook his head. I told you I don't have them. But you know where they might be, I said, remembering his journal. The Rusty Anchor. You said he met his contacts there. If we can get proof, we can end this. He looked at me like I was crazy, but there was a spark in his eyes, a glimmer of hope. You're insane, he said, but he was smiling. Okay, let's do it. We drove back to Portland under the cover of night, the city's lights blurring past us. The rusty anchor was busier than before, packed with noise and smoke. We slipped in, keeping our heads down, and found a booth in the back. Ethan scanned the room, his body tense. "He's not here," he whispered. "But that guy, the one with the scar, he's one of Victor's." I followed his gaze to the man from before, now alone at a table, a briefcase at his feet. "That's our shot," I said. "If those documents are anywhere, they're with him." Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Stay here. I'll get close." "No way," I said, grabbing his arm. "We're in this together." He looked at me, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just us. Then he leaned in and kissed me. Quick, fierce, like he was afraid it'd be our last. "Okay," he said. "Together." We moved through the crowd, my heart pounding so loud I was sure everyone could hear it. The man with the scar didn't notice us as we slid into a booth nearby, close enough to see the briefcase. Ethan whispered a plan, distract him, grab the case, get out. It was risky, but we had no choice. I stood, pretending to stumble, and bumped into the man's table, spilling his drink. "Oh, man, I'm so sorry," I said, playing the clumsy idiot. He cursed, brushing off his jacket, and Ethan moved like a shadow, slipping the briefcase under our table. We were out the door before the man noticed, running through the rain-soaked streets, the briefcase heavy in Ethan's hands. Back in my apartment, we opened it, our breaths held. Inside were files, names, dates, transactions, proof of Victor's crimes. "We did it," Ethan said, his voice shaking with relief. But as we looked through the papers, a chill ran through me. This wasn't just about money. Victor was involved in something bigger, something that could get us both killed. The files spread across my apartment floor were a map of Victor's empire. Money laundering, extortion, connections to people whose names I recognized from the news. Ethan's hands trembled as he read, his face pale. "This is worse than I thought," he said. "He's not just a crook. He's got people everywhere, politicians, cops, you name it." I sat beside him, my mind racing. "We can't keep this, Ethan. We have to get it to someone who can do something, someone we can trust." "Oh," he asked, his voice raw. "If Victor finds out we have this, we're dead." I thought of my old college friend, Sarah, who worked for a local newspaper. She'd always been fearless, digging into stories no one else would touch. "I know someone," I said, "but we have to move fast." We spent the night copying the files, photographing every page with my phone. Ethan was quiet, his eyes haunted, but every time our hands brushed, I felt that spark, the one that had started in the laundromat, the one that kept us fighting. "I'm sorry I dragged you into this," he said at one point, his voice barely a whisper. "You didn't drag me," I said, cupping his face. "I chose this. I chose you." He kissed me then, slow and deep, and for a moment the world outside didn't exist. It was just us, two broken people finding something whole in each other. But the moment passed, and reality crashed back in. We had to act. The next morning, I met Sarah at a diner across town, slipping her a USB drive with the files. "This is big, Jake," she said, her eyes wide as she skimmed the photos on my phone. "If this is real, it could bring Victor down. But you need to lay low. Both of you." We went back to the cabin, hoping distance would keep us safe. But Victor was faster than we thought. That night, as we sat by the fire, headlights cut through the darkness outside. Ethan grabbed my hand, his grip tight. "He's here," he whispered. The door burst open, and Victor stepped in, flanked by the man with the scar and another guy, both carrying guns. My heart stopped, but Ethan stepped in front of me, his voice steady. "Leave him out of this, Victor. This is between you and me." Victor's smile was cold. "You stole from me, Ethan. You and your little friend here. Did you think I wouldn't find you?" I wanted to run, to fight, but my legs were lead. Then I remembered the notebook tucked in my jacket. It wasn't much, but it was something. "We have proof," I said, my voice shaking. "It's already with a reporter. If anything happens to us, it goes public." Victor's eyes narrowed, but I saw a flicker of doubt. "You're bluffing." "Try me," I said, praying Sarah had already started digging. The standoff felt like hours, though it was probably seconds. Then Victor laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You're braver than I thought, kid. But this isn't over." He signaled his men, and they left, the door slamming behind them. Ethan collapsed against me, his body shaking. "You were amazing," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're not safe yet," I said, but I held him tight, feeling the weight of everything we'd been through. A week later, Sarah's article hit the front page. Victor's empire unraveled overnight. Arrests, investigations, his name splashed across every news outlet. Ethan and I stayed at the cabin, watching the fallout on a borrowed laptop. He was free, but the scars of his past lingered. One evening, as we sat on the cabin's porch, the sunset painting the sky in pinks and golds, Ethan took my hand. "I never thought I'd have this," he said. "A chance to start over. With you." I smiled, my heart full. "You helped me fold my clothes, remember? Guess we're good at fixing messes together." He laughed, and for the first time, it was unguarded, full of hope. We'd faced danger, uncovered secrets, and come out stronger. The laundromat was where it started. A chance meeting that unfolded a love worth fighting for, and a future we'd build, one carefully folded moment at a time.